Hello and welcome to AGTP Daily, where we cover the most significant tech topics in the US and abroad. Today is Tuesday, the 3rd of March, 2026. Let's get right to it. 3 topics today. ChatGPT's massive uninstalls. But in the end of the day, does this really matter? And after all of that, Anthropic's Claude goes down. We'll get to that too. And Ray-Ban, Meta glasses. Is this Google Glass Redux? What is this from a privacy perspective? Okay, let's jump right into this. ChatGPT users are leaving because of the Pentagon deal. Is that really why? So there's a familiar arc, I think, in consumer tech. Our product becomes infrastructure, people build routines around it, and then suddenly one decision reminds everyone that infrastructure has kind of state-related implications. This week, that decision was OpenAI signing a Pentagon contract to deploy advanced AI systems in classified environments, and the reaction wasn't abstract. It showed up as very specific types of behavior. And as always here, this is not a political commentary. This is what is the interaction between states anywhere in the world and foundational infrastructure style technology, and then what it means for individuals who are also using that technology as well from a consumer tech perspective. According to App Intelligence data cited by TechCrunch, US uninstalls of ChatGPT mobile app jumped 295% day over day on Saturday, February 28th. A massive swing versus what the same analysis describes as a roughly 9% typical day-over-day uninstall rate over the prior 30 days. This is not a slow drift. This is a spike, and a measurable spike at that. And we're going to get to this too, but remember all the news around Anthropic last week where Dario Amodei was just saying, look, we're not going to deal with the Pentagon if they're going to make us do if they're going to use our technology to do mass surveillance and use it on autonomous weapons. And there was a big to-do about how this big difference between this contract, this potential contract that Anthropic was going to sign and that OpenAI was going to sign. And OpenAI was pretty down on the side of, look, we'll just see how this thing progresses. The contract doesn't explicitly say they will use it for those other things, right? And as long as we're comfortable with the fact that they say they're not going to use it, what's their intent when they're going to use this technology, we seem to be fine, right? And in that same window, right, when OpenAI signed this deal with the Pentagon, Anthropic's Claude surged, rising to number 1 on Apple's US App Store free rankings, while ChatGPT's US downloads fell and 1-star reviews surged. Welcome to the online world of overreactions. And here's what I have to say about this. This idea that this almost reminds me of that guy in the car, right, who's really scared, on the street. He would never confront anybody anywhere. But in his car, let's just say he's doing things he would never do before, right? When somebody cuts him off or if somebody's driving a little too slowly in front of him. This is the way I feel about 1-star reviews when people get angry about stuff. It's like, yeah, never mind. I'm just going to leave you a 1-star review and I'm going to uninstall the app today, but maybe I'll reinstall it tomorrow. Who knows? Anyway, so what are we actually witnessing here? In some ways, this is not just people switching chatbots, right? This is a trust event. And I think in a way, it's a value event as well. And trust events, and we spoke about this all last week, right, have a way of reshaping markets faster than product features do. And let's put a timeline on the table here. Okay. Again, in the AI world, the trust is one of the most important features. We'll get back to this as well, because I think it's really important to note this is never going to go away. If I don't trust what you're doing with the way I'm interacting with your artificial intelligence lab, with your AI lab at scale, with the way I interact with Gemini, with the way I interact with Perplexity, with ChatGPT, right, with Anthropic, if I don't trust what's happening and I don't trust my own agency when I'm using that technology, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to switch, or at least try to find a better way. So let's go through this a little bit. OpenAI reached an agreement with the Pentagon to deploy artificial intelligence systems inside classified environments, which in a way makes sense. Here's a classified environment. We want to build something specific just for you so that inside that environment, with all the information you have there, you can collate it, understand it, iterate on it, and do it so much better. But it's almost like what's the right word to say? It's almost like a virtual skiff, in the sense that nothing else is allowed in, nothing else is allowed out. And inside of this highly classified data, we're still going to give you the tools necessary in a very segregated way so that you can then better understand all of this classified data that you have and not have to have 7,000 analysts work on it for 10 hours a day for 2 months to try to figure stuff out. Maybe from an intelligence standpoint, this is going to be much more efficient. But then the backlash hit. And I think part of this is probably also a reaction to Anthropic's reaction to the same, not request from the government, but Anthropic basically brought this up. We don't want mass surveillance, and we definitely don't want our technology being used for mass surveillance, and we don't want our technology being used for automated weaponry. Because at some level, we don't know what's going to happen. Fears that classified deployment is a short walk to surveillance, I think, and that national security is a broad umbrella under which boundaries blur. I think it just made people nervous. And at some level, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman later described the rollout as a little bit opportunistic and a little bit sloppy. Language that matters because it concedes that the core critique wasn't about policy. It was about process and signaling. So should we have done it this way? And shouldn't we have mentioned some things about what we want as well, the way we want our technology to be used? Again, this gets back to that idea of like, you can use the car, you can have it, you can have a license, but are you really going to drive it into a crowd of people? This is something we don't want. And in response, right, OpenAI moved unusually fast for a company of its size. Remember, they just did a $110 billion round. This is a massive company with massive influence, right? It began amending this agreement, which is interesting, right? Because think about it in the context of Anthropic. Last week, it sounded like they were being very intransigent, right? We're not going to change our minds on this. But here's OpenAI saying, the new language makes it explicit, similar to what Anthropic wanted, that its tools will not be used for domestic surveillance of U.S. persons. That's very clear, the U.S. people, yeah? Including via commercially acquired personal data, and that use by intelligence agencies would not require a separate agreement. This sounds a lot like what Anthropic was arguing for last week, as I mentioned, right? So here's what happened. OpenAI makes a deal. The society at large creates this backlash, like, wait a second, what are we doing here? What are we doing, right? And then it gets amended. And this whole thing happened over the weekend, which I think is kind of amazing and kind of great. Because at some level, you have to take a stand on this stuff, right? And we talked about this last week, nobody wants mass surveillance. And nobody understands what's going to happen if we have automated weapons. Again, just go back and watch one of those final scenes in Oppenheimer where they're just about to detonate that first atomic bomb to test it. And you're like, we're not really sure what's going to happen, what the chain reaction of this is going to be. And I think in some ways, the making weapons autonomous is kind of a similar thing. And I'm sure I mentioned this in last week's episode too. It sounds like a great idea. No humans will get hurt, no soldiers at risk. They can make decisions that maybe we can't see, or they can make them faster because they have faster access to data. But then what? And it's that then what that we don't know. Right. And the interesting question here, let's just get back to the basics, is not whether the Pentagon should use AI, or frankly, whether any government or any government agency should use AI. The interesting question is, why did this specific deal trigger a consumer exodus dynamic? Why did people leave? Like 295%, like on installs, is a big number, particularly when on average over the past 30 days, it's been 9%. This seems to me like a pretty big deal. And I think the first reason here is ChatGPT is not just an app. And it's more than just like a daily companion, right? So you use it at work, you use it at school, use it for writing, use it to get medical information, brainstorming, and sometimes really personal inputs. Like, it's weird what people will ask a chatbot when they feel like nobody else is watching. Right, and then we'll get to when nobody else is watching when we get to the topic of Meta today and the Meta-RayBan glasses. I'm not against that per se, but let's just talk about that later. Okay, but that changes the standard that people apply, particularly when they're putting in deeply personal information, and frankly, when they're not. Like, imagine having somebody look over your shoulder as you're like doing research about some term paper you're going to write or some thesis you're going to write. But there's always somebody looking over your shoulder, knowing exactly what you're thinking about, knowing exactly what you're theorizing, knowing exactly what you're trying to iterate around, and then sharing that information or making that information widely available. You just want to have sort of different guardrails around that, right? When something becomes so deeply involved in your life, users kind of expect value alignment. not just performance. I mean, it's great the fact that ChatGPT or Anthropic, that the performance is amazing. But even if offline, completely offline, you're a business partner and you have to have value alignment. Because if you don't, one of those people are going to go all the way to the left, one of them is going to go all the way straight, the other one's going to go all the way backwards. Like, you don't know which direction that person's going to take. And if your values aren't aligned at the end of the day, you're going to argue about unnecessary things. And I think online is no different, right? And the second thing that came up is that the fear wasn't military use in the abstract. It was mission creep. And the anxiety is that a tool framed as classified deployment, which we kind of mentioned earlier, becomes a platform for surveillance workflows. Again, it's a slippery slope from we're just going to use this internally to try to understand what's going on in the world to we're going to use this internally to try to understand what's going on inside of our own country. And it's just a slippery slope from that idea of it's going to sit inside classified systems. Well, then what information's inside those classified systems? What if we had more information inside those classified systems about things that maybe we shouldn't have, right? And what if some future policy changes as well? At some level, it would seem to me, right, that as policies change, as admins change, remember, it's not a political commentary. It's sort of a governmental policy at scale globally. It seems to me at some level that all government policy is mission creep. And, pick your poison. Go look at anything you want, whether it's, we'll have a small income tax. We'll have a small VAT tax, whatever it is. The VAT tax starts at 2%. It ends up at 8.5%. Japan's a good example of this. I remember when the first VAT came out. Now it's way higher than it was. What is that? Mission creep. It works slowly at first, and then just bit by bit by bit, or as the Japanese would say, done, 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 right? It just gets bigger. Okay. OpenAI's response implicitly acknowledges that this is the center of gravity because the amended language focuses specifically on domestic surveillance and tracking and actually spells out limits that in ways that the U.S. government can and cannot or should not use it. Let's see what the impactfulness of these agreements are, and let's see how tightly they ascribe to these. But at least at some level, OpenAI, in some ways, was now agreeing with Anthropic and saying, yeah, we don't want mass surveillance domestically, and we don't want autonomous weapons using our technology. That's not the reason why this was built. This technology was built to make people's lives better, not to make people's lives scarier. And the third reason why this is important is because the market has an easy moral substitute. Right? I mean, OpenAI looked around and said, is there an alternative to us? And if there is, what's going to be the outcome of this? But when there's a viable competitor, right? They looked around and said, Claude, Gemini, others, switching becomes really feasible and really easy. I mean, think about it. If you stopped using ChatGPT right now, you just said, I don't want to deal with OpenAI because for some reason your values did not align with theirs, right? And this is true in other technologies as well. But let's finish this thought first. Well, then you could easily switch to Claude. You could easily switch to Perplexity. You could easily switch to Gemini. And think about this too. If you're already paying for Google's business suite, so you pay for extra mail, you pay for storage, you pay for all these other things you're using, you pay for Google Cloud, you get Gemini essentially for free. So the switching costs are really, really easy. And that's a problem when you can just vote with your feet that easily. And I think OpenAI realized this as well. Remember, OpenAI was also the fastest, I think, consumer application to get uptake up to 100 million users. It was just the fastest one to do that. That's a lot of users. And they don't want to risk losing those, even though they'll probably make more money going forward from their enterprise business clients. Still, having all those users out there gives them more data as well. This is important, right? So Claude hitting number 1 in the US free apps ranking matters less as like a scoreboard win and more as like a narrative event to me. What does it signify? What does it mean? And it suggests a new kind of competitive advantage in AI, right? Now that we know how these models work, now that they've been out in the wild for a while, now that they've been iterated on, changed, adapted, and they're just widespread use of them, now what are the real advantages? The advantages are not necessarily the best model. Again, we can always say, like, what's better, Windows or Mac OS? At some point, you're just making a value judgment, right? Like, I just like the way this one works better than the way this one works, or maybe my sister works at Apple. or my brother like works at Microsoft, so I have to. You know what I mean? Like this is the thing. It's not even the most features. All of this stuff is going to at some point have the same features. But what it really means is which one do I trust the most? Right. So if you think about it, at least back in the day, iOS was focused heavily on privacy. Android was focused heavy on configurability. Which one do you want and which one do you trust the most for you? Right? Apple has done this with personal data sharing. We talked about it. And privacy perspective, at least from a marketing vantage point. Whether you believe it or not, or whether you believe it 100% or not, in a way, it doesn't matter. Apple has always sold iOS as this is a much more private, much more secure operating system. Android is no longer just a complete free-for-all, but it's more like you can configure this any way you want. And yeah, there's privacy built in, but Apple's really focusing on it, particularly from a marketing perspective. And the contrast here got sharpened because the public understood this as a fork in the road when it comes to OpenAI, ChatGPT, and other providers of large LLMs. One major AI lab engages the Pentagon with guardrails. Another refuses on terms it argues are insufficient. And to me, at the end of the day, those terms that Anthropic was arguing about are the ones now that it seems to me that OpenAI has agreed to. We can cover at some point like what that means for Anthropic. And remember, the government was threatening Anthropic as well, with like we're going to say that you're a supply chain risk. I can't remember what the exact terminology was, but now what? I think that's an important question. Here's where this story gets really interesting to me. OpenAI did not respond with a vague assurance. It responded with a blueprint, it seems to me. But again, Anthropic, I think, was coming up with this first. And I feel like OpenAI's hand was kind of forced because they were like, yeah, we're not going to do that thing that Anthropic said they were going to do, but we're still going to have this contract that we think is important for us because it still pays us a lot of money. And then they looked around and everybody was getting really mad and they thought, yeah, maybe we're not going to do that. Okay. So here's what they essentially said for their red lines. No mass domestic surveillance, which is tricky, right? No mass domestic surveillance. Yeah, I'm not gonna dig into the semantics here, but let's see what happens, right? No directing autonomous weapon systems. And this one is actually pretty interesting too. No high stakes automated decisions. Huh. It's a little bit vague to me, but I think I kind of understand what they mean. They don't want military decisions getting made in a high stakes situation where maybe lives are on the line, property's on the line, nuclear weapons are on the line, whatever it is, and just have that be automated. And then later be able to have somebody go, I don't know, I didn't make that decision. The AI made that decision. Again, we gets back to all this stuff like who's really in charge and who's liable. And it also argued that enforcement isn't just a policy, it's architecture. And I think this is something that Anthropic was arguing about as well. So no edge devices. This exists in the cloud. So it means that at some level, OpenAI maintains some control about it. They have to use OpenAI's safety stack with classifiers and stuff like that internally that OpenAI can update. So some guardrails here. Cleared OpenAI personnel in the loop. These are probably going to be people with security clearances. They're going to be able to say, whoa, our agreement does not allow you to do that thing. Nice try. But we're not going to be able to do that. And, some kind of contract language that references existing laws in the United States, which is important. And this is a key shift, I think, because AI companies are learning that for their own credibility, they must talk like systems engineers and constitutional lawyers at the same time. And this is kind of tricky, right? Because those two things don't normally come together. But with artificial intelligence becoming this sort of nation state level infrastructure tool, and definitely part of a bigger toolbox and bigger ecosystem, this is just going to become more and more important. And I think almost unprecedented in a way. Like in a way, nobody really cared how the government used Microsoft Windows or what they did inside PowerPoint. It really didn't impact anybody else. But what the government does with artificial intelligence and the policies that get built around it and the frameworks that get built around it are really important. Reuters reported that Altman's statement that the Pentagon affirmed OpenAI services would not be used by intelligence agencies without a further contract modification, I think is pretty good. So what changes after everybody leaves ChatGPT? And let's be careful, it's not everybody. And again, I want to say this. Consumer AI, I think, at the end of the day becomes value competitive. Model quality still matters, but the big differentiator increasingly becomes what institutional relationships does this tool enable and what lines want to cross? What can I do with this technology? What should I not do with it? What can't I do with it? This is really important stuff. And trust becomes a product service. We're just going to keep banging on this because we think it's really important. Expect maybe new UX experiences, UX patterns, clear disclosures, and a whole bunch of new ways you can and cannot use this technology, because being ambiguous, and I think some of these things that OpenAI agreed to maybe at the beginning have to be ambiguous, but over time will get iterated, be much more specific. You cannot do these things, these very specific things. Because again, it's early days, right? We don't know exactly how this technology is going to get used. I think that will iterate over time. And national security partnerships will probably look more like regulated markets. There's a way you can and cannot use this technology. That playbook is still being developed. And as we get more usage, as we get more experience, as we work together on this, meaning between the AI labs and the government, and frankly with institutions as well, big corporations, there are going to have to be rules. We're not going to stop talking about how there definitely does need to be some sort of constitutional understanding, not a governmental constitution, but a technology constitution around how this tech should be used. And the real battle here is legitimacy, because the next decade won't just decide which models are most powerful. It will decide which institutions, the public, you and me, the ones that we decide are trusted intermediaries for thought, for writing, and for decision support. And here's the way you have to think about this at scale, just nice and quickly. Trust matters across the board. Across the board, not just for your AI technology, not just for technology, but for everything. Again, let's get back to the thing that my grandfather taught me. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation and a lifetime to build trust and a moment to lose it. And if switching costs are low and trust is lost, loyalty is closer to 0 than it is to 1. Okay. What's some of the, I don't know if I would call it humorous, but what's some of the kind of ironic fallout here? Well, it's pretty ironic timing for Claude to go down. Because again, after all this sermon drang about how Anthropic refuses to do this and OpenAI is definitely going to do that, and after all the uninstalls that took place, Anthropic went down. There's a saying in the National Football League. I'm a big NFL football fan. Sorry for all you people out there who are going to hate me for this. Been a Pats fan my whole life. Went through some really dry periods. Go Drake May. But there's a saying in the National Football League that the most important ability is availability. I love this saying, actually. You can have the best skills in the world, but if you're not available, if you're injured, or if you're just not there to do it, well, then the skills don't matter at all. You can be better at me. You can be better at me than everything. But if I'm like 90% of your skill set, but I'm available, I'm a better option. This is true in the NFL. It's also true in the tech world. This is brutally important in the tech world, particularly as soon as you reach scale. Availability is, in almost all cases, a product feature. Right? Think about it. If your CDN went down, you get mad. Right? If you're Google Docs, again, because it's online, right? So is it available? Is it not available? If you can't use it, you can't use it. That's bad. I think this is the most important feature by far of any technology, because again, as they all harmonize to very similar and sort of same level functionality, if I can log into one and I can't log into the other, which one am I going to use over time? And this is particularly true when it comes to mission critical infrastructure, right? Which is what frontier AI and its associated ecosystems are rapidly becoming. This is mission critical infrastructure. The thing you were not using 6 months ago is now one of the main things you need to do your job or to live your life. And this is unfortunately why this is pretty ironic timing, because Anthropic's Claude went down right as it was enjoying a wave of momentum at the exact moment people were actively testing it as an alternative to ChatGPT, where they're going like, I don't agree with the way OpenAI and ChatGPT are making an agreement with or contracting with the government. And again, it's not a political thing. It's a, what should governments be using frontier AI technology to be doing? And I think in most cases, people don't want mass surveillance. I don't think people want any surveillance. I mean, it's hard to get away from surveillance when there are cameras everywhere. And frankly, everyone's got like a chest cam and everyone's got a cell phone. But when the government starts doing mass surveillance and inserting it inside of a artificial intelligence ecosystem, I think it becomes problematic for people. But people don't switch for model quality anymore. They switch for trust. Do I trust what you're doing? And trust is built on one like big question. And that question is not, does it work when I need it? There's going to be a subtle difference here, so pay attention. To me, that question is not, does it work when I need it? The question is, does it work whenever I need it? Okay, this is a subtle but important difference. Let's talk about some timeline stuff too. On Monday, March 2nd, users reported widespread problems addressing Claude. Anthropic's status page reflected incidents and elevator to error rates, that later were marked and resolved. Some reporting, and I think this is where I would come down, at least at some level, frames the likely trigger as a demand surge that brutally overwhelmed parts of the system. Again, I always go back to Twitter's original fail whale. At least at the beginning, Twitter was great. There were 7 people on it. They were saying what they were doing for lunch and for dinner or whatever. Or I just wrote some code. But as more and more people came on, the system wasn't built for that type of performance and that type of throughput. I mean, today it's fine. But the fail whale used to come out often on Twitter if you were there during the early days. And you don't naturally degrade. You don't gradually degrade these systems. You hit a threshold and then suddenly a dependency becomes a bottleneck. Like auth, like logging in, sessions, rate limits, a data store, whatever it is, it says, we were never sure we were going to have this many people on our system at one time. But the going down isn't the thing that really matters at scale here. What really matters is the timing of the story. Because in AI right now, we're in what you would call kind of, I know it's a little bit topical, maybe not as topical, it might have been a couple of weeks ago, but we're in what I would call like a credibility Olympics. And yeah, I know they're over, okay? But it still kind of felt relevant. And I mean, aren't the Olympics always relevant? Because everybody kind of knows what it means. A big competition among multiple countries, teams that have already been formed, and guys and gals get together and try to beat other people. These gigantic models compete on intelligence for sure. Okay, but they also compete on reliability, governance, which gets to this agreement, right? What are the rules of engagement when you have this kind of contract? Predictability. Is it up? Is it going to be working for me? And operational maturity, in other words, does it work like a piece of mature technology? And when users are doing things, when users are interacting with that technology, whether it's downloading or moving workflows, right? Because again, if you've been using ChatGPT to do some workflows or you've integrated some workflows there, and you're thinking their values no longer align with mine, and you saw the numbers spike, we talked about it earlier, of people uninstalling the technology, well, they're going to have to reinstall some technology to be able to then do the same workflows that they were doing prior. And that just takes time. An outage is not just downtime when this happens. If you've made a decision that says, like, I'm going to sell the car that I own to buy this new car, and you get in that new car, and like the air conditioning doesn't work and you live in a warm place, like what are you going to do? Right? This is suboptimal. And it's fuel for narrative, right? And this happened, of course, when Claude wasn't quietly in the background because Anthropic was making its own case for why its values were more aligned with yours, right? And particularly when it happened when there was a surge in attention for it as well and adoption. So instead of like a minor technical hiccup, it becomes a public stress test. Okay, you say you're better. You say your values are more aligned with mine, but can you actually handle the success at scale that you're talking about that you want? Did you build for this? Are you ready for this? Right? And here's again, we keep talking about this, but I'm going to bang on it until people understand for sure. Here's the key shift. AI assistants, large language models, agentic AI, all of this stuff now that we're using every day. And you see people bragging about it. I saw one of my buddies today bragging on LinkedIn about how it took me a weekend and I built 9 AI agents. This is a smart dude, by the way, to do all these things for me. And I didn't do it with a consultant. I did it all by myself. And his contention, and I don't disagree with this, is AI is not about adoption. It's about how you use it every day and learning how to use it better and better. And because it's becoming infrastructure at scale is graded differently, right? The internet is down. A CDN is down. You don't even know how to use a CDN. All you know is that when it goes down, your website cannot be accessed, and other websites that you want to access globally, no matter where you are, may or may not be able to be accessed. You know that's not good, right? And if a social app goes down, let's just restate that. If a social app goes down, if Instagram goes down or something like that goes down, sure, you're not happy about it. But it's not mission critical necessarily, depending on how you've connected your business to it. But if your work brain goes down, your coding assistant, your writing assistant, your research assistant, you don't just complain. You reconsider dependency, single points of failure, and what I like to call single points of influence. Because if your infrastructure and your own personal ecosystem and your own work ecosystem is set up around using AI Lab A and it just goes down, you don't necessarily have time to set everything up on another AI Labs model. You just don't. But your work is still due. You still owe somebody some kind of outcome. So what are you going to do? This is why reliability is becoming a competitive advantage in a competitive mode. It really is. And again, getting back to this thing, the best ability is availability. Because when you choose an AI provider, you're not buying a model in isolation. You're buying a stack. We talk about this. We're past the point where these large language models are just like one product. It's like a full suite of services for you, and it's going to become even more full. Again, let's go back to Microsoft Windows. If you're using Windows, then you're using Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. You're using Microsoft Office. And if Windows goes down, every tool that you have installed and every piece of software that you have installed that runs on Windows goes down. And you can't just like switch to a Mac. I think that's not going to happen in 5 minutes, but you still owe that report to your boss. Same thing. Okay. And if you're using that stack, and people out there remember the blue screen of death from Microsoft Windows in its earliest days, this is similar to that. You're sitting there doing your work and you're like, I can't even log in. I can't even sign up. These stacks have to have and have to be able to absorb unpredictable spikes. Because again, if you want more and more people to use them, if you want more and more institutions to use them, if you want more and more people inside these large institutions to use your technology, they have to be available. And if the system is not available, if it buckles during a moment of heightened demand, the market will determine this as potentially not ready for prime time. This is bad for any business, but particularly for a software business, and particularly for a software business where there are switching costs, but the switching costs are not fatal. Okay. There's also a psychological paradox here. Values, right? So this idea that I agree with, in this case, just as an example, I agree with, and not I, but like one agrees with Anthropic's view on how to interact with governments globally. And OpenAI seemed to have been capitulating. So the value of how to interact with the government is the thing that got you the download in the first place. But the uptime is going to get you the habit. It's going to get people to stay with you. And this is really important. A lot of users choose tools based on perceived alignment. And Claude has definitely, at least over the last weekend, has definitely benefited from that. One's thought process is more aligned with this idea of how to interact with governments. And if one disagrees with the way that OpenAI was doing this, at least initially, although I feel like they've more harmonized with what Anthropic was doing, well, then you're going to stop using it, or some people will. You may say this is a knee-jerk reaction. We'll have to look at the statistics over time to see what percentage, or what it feels like, what percentage of people are actually like, okay, I deleted my account. Well, actually, I didn't delete my account. I just deleted the app from my phone. But maybe I'll just go get it back and I won't tell anybody, kind of thing. Right? Like I made my statement when I deleted it, but all my workflows are kind of embedded into OpenAI and into ChatGPT. And while Anthropic may be great, it kind of feels like now the value set is harmonized. I'm going right back to what I used to do. It'll be interesting to see how that happens over time, right? And part of the reason why is because at least initially, this reliability and availability are what matters. These are your like most important cognition tools, and they're integrated, at least in my life, and I think in everybody else's life that uses these tools. They're embedded in almost every aspect of everything that you do. So if Claude was down during the trial window, when a new user was trying to figure out, hey, should I use this instead? Then the switching cost flips. They don't feel committed. They feel unconvinced. And at some level, they feel scared. They're like, wait a second. If I can't even get in, if I can't even sign up, what's it going to be like when I start using this? There can be some concern. So yeah, it's a little ironic to me, right? That Claude had like a major outage just as it was starting to get momentum. But it's also a reminder, I think, at scale for the entire artificial intelligence industry. AI is no longer being judged as just a useful sidekick. It's not. It's not something where you're like, hey, I wonder if I can make a cool image to do this. It's really being judged as critical infrastructure. Again, I wake up every day and it's part of the tool set that I use to do my job across the board in some ways, right? And because of that, if it doesn't work, I now have to figure out a different way to do stuff. And there's some things that I do with AI that I think would be really hard to do quickly without access to it. And in these infrastructure markets, the product isn't just who's smarter. The product, as we said, is the best ability is its availability when real work is on the line. And I'm just going to say it again. In tech, as in the NFL, the best ability is always going to be availability. Okay. Let's talk about the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. And this is the privacy crisis that nobody wanted. And I'm not against having these glasses, to be fair. I'd love to test them. I really would. And I think we'll get to Google Glass in a moment. But if you were around when Google Glass first came out, I mean, there were bar fights. People would see somebody walking with Google Glass and go, are you filming? Turn that thing off. You're not turning it off? It's my glasses. And people would actually fight about this. I don't think this is going to be any different. I mean, think about this. If you were just like standing in a bar and or standing in a restaurant, someone just like picked up their phone and just started filming you, you'd be pretty mad. You'd ask them to turn it off. It's way more obvious with a phone, and I think we'll get to that as well. But you don't just want this ambient surveillance going on. But let's start with some statistics or just some numbers. And this makes it sound like a huge success, right? And this is kind of cool. More than 7 million artificial intelligence smart glasses were sold in 2025. These Ray-Ban Meta and Oakley units, according to EssilorLuxotti's full year results. And if you don't know who EssilorLuxottica is, it is by far the biggest seller of eyeglasses and sunglasses in the world. It's not even close. They own all the brands that you think are separate, but aren't. And here's the thing. When you scale a camera and microphone wearable to millions of faces, you're not just scaling convenience, right? Like I'd love to have something that sits right on my eyes. And as opposed to having to grab my phone and try to figure out like, how can I get information? Imagine if I could just casually ask ChatGPT in my and have the results in my eyes saying like little questions about people with whom I'm interacting. That's super convenient. But on the other hand, I don't think those people want me filming them. Okay? And this idea of like scaling that kind of ambient, think about it, it's just there. Like ambient noise, like an air conditioning noise, or the sound of like your washing machine in the background. It's just ambient. It's just there. It's not really loud. It's not really soft. You kind of don't care. It's like Enya. For those of you that remember that. Ambient noise. Okay? But it's ambient noise and ambient surveillance in this case that is being sold as like a consumer electronics product. And I think this is, it's not the first privacy moment for smart glasses, and it's definitely not theoretical anymore because we're now hearing from human beings in loop. And let's just be really clear about this. The noise and the backlash around Google Glass, and to be fair, this was like 15 years ago. I don't know, it's a long time ago. Was large. But think about how much the technology has advanced. Think about how much more advanced the imagery is, the access to the internet is, the battery life is, all of these things, right? So an investigation by Svenska Dagbladet and Göteborgs-Posten, these are two like foreign technology news places, is now describing a hidden workforce. They've done some research. Data annotators working for a subcontractor in Nairobi, none of this sounds good, who review clips and interactions connected to the glasses and Meta's AI systems. And there must be some kind of agreement when you use the glasses that Meta can periodically, and again, this is maybe the phone companies used to do this when you dialed like, what was it, 911? No, 411, I think, for information back in the day. I did that job actually when I was in college. And every now and then they'd have a supervisor just like listen in on your conversation to make sure you weren't saying anything wild. And Meta, maybe when they sell you these glasses, Meta-RayBan, maybe when they sell you these glasses, there's an agreement that they have that like periodically we can just look at some of this stuff there in an anonymous way, so we can understand like how the glasses are working, how it's handling data, and how we can make them better, how we can improve and iterate on them. But some of the stuff that these people working in Nairobi are telling us is that they're describing seeing intensely private footage captured in ordinary life. Use your own imagination. I don't think I need to detail that. And that single detail should redefine the entire product category, because the real issue isn't, do the glasses have a recording light, like a little red light, right? So even with your phone, you can't tell if I'm recording. I mean, sure, you can, because if I'm holding it in this way, then, I mean, you can fake this. You can pretend like you're taking a selfie and take photos and take video of other people. But it's way more obvious. You don't have to do anything, right? If it's ambient surveillance, if the glasses are on, and sure, is there a little red light that tells you filming is taking place? Sure. But I think more importantly to me is, what is the default social contract when AI is worn on the face? In other words, what do I expect from you? What do you expect from me? What do we expect society to do? Again, I don't expect when I'm having dinner with my friends for someone who I don't know to come over and start filming it. I don't even want to be filmed on the street. I live in one of the biggest tourist cities in the world. People are constantly taking pictures and taking videos. I don't want to be in those videos and pictures. But if they're just wearing these glasses, I wouldn't even know. I wouldn't know what a pair of Ray-Ban Meta glasses looked like. I wouldn't be able to differentiate them from regular Ray-Bans for sure. Neither would you, right? And like I said, smartphone cameras themselves have created privacy fights. And I mean real fights. But phones are just way more obvious. You can see them. You can also feel the moment. And smart glasses are really different. I want to reiterate this here. The camera's at eye level, and the devices look like normal eyewear. That's what I said. Like, you can't tell the difference between something that's just a Ray-Ban and something that has a camera attached to it and is connected to the internet. So the people being recorded may not even realize that a recording is happening. It's just too fuzzy for me. I want to be sure. I've literally put my hand up in front of somebody else's iPhone when I'm walking down the street. I don't want to be in your video. I don't want to be in your photos. Okay. It was like, you also have to think about what is the economic reality here, right? AI models don't improve by magic. They improve through data and feedback loops and by training. What does that mean? Gathering more data, right? And part of that data, and I know somebody who runs a company that does this. I'm not going to mention the name, but frequently through human review and labeling, you'd be surprised like how much labeling gets done for stuff by humans. Even just simple things like, that is definitely an apple, right? That's a can of Coca-Cola. Maybe it's blurry. And maybe, again, we forget like how powerful our own sensory, our own senses are. Like, I can tell when I look at this from really far away exactly what it is, because I just know what the brand is supposed to look like. And even if it's a little bit blurry, I know it's my favorite Sing soda. And I could probably see a Coca-Cola can from like, I don't know, a good distance. But AI can't do that yet. It's on its way. But what ends up happening is somebody working through human feedback loop looks at a photo that's, let's say, blurry and says, yep, Coca-Cola can, whatever it is. And then over time, the AI can learn the same way you can learn that even if it's blurry, they can understand what's going on. But the investigation proves this one thing, that this AI assistant experience isn't only about high computation, high throughput, and high compute. It's also an industrial pipeline of humans validating outputs and categorizing reality. Again, just like I said, you got to get humans in the loop to understand like exactly what's going on here, at least at the beginning. And I don't think that's ever going to go away. Don't underestimate how amazing the connectivity is between your own eyes and your own brain and the stuff that it can figure out, the gaps in that it can fill. But again, we talked about this earlier. Meta's own terms in some cases that interactions can be reviewed manually by humans. Again, I just want this to be way more specific, right? Just imagine situations where you're using a product that requires some kind of privacy or where you'd like some kind of privacy. Simple thing, like let's say it's just sleeping. I don't want somebody watching me in my bed when I'm sleeping. Definitely not without knowing about it. Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of what this is. That's what this ambient surveillance feels like. It's like, sure, I'm not really doing anything wrong or bad, but why are you watching me? And the idea here is that smart glasses collapse the difference between like private life and what that product is meant to do to you. And think about this too. Let's just to get back to the phone. A phone sits in your pocket. Your laptop or your desktop sits on your desk or sits on wherever. But glasses sit on your face during the moment where you don't think of it as content. Like you know when you're explicitly filming something on your phone or taking a picture. And you know when somebody else is either. You can see them smiling or taking a picture of their food. Right? I mean, food is a big thing that people take picture of. But it's pretty obvious. But the question is when the AI is sitting on your face, you don't think of this as content. And that's kind of dangerous, right? Because, again, these LLMs and AI does not improve through magic. It improves through more and more data collection and training data. Sometimes that data is collected accidentally, and sometimes unknowingly, and sometimes with consequences that only appear later. And the growth curve says this is going to get bigger, not smaller. We're just going to gather more and more data. Again, we can get back to what the implications are here for data centers, because the more data we gather, the more data centers we need, the more storage we need, the more compute we need, the more throughput we need. That's a discussion for another time. But we're no longer talking about a niche community here of early adopters. We gave you the numbers, and we'll get back to that in a moment as well. We're talking about a mass market sensor layer. Just think about it. Again, in the old days when cell phones first came out, I remember, right, because I was sitting on a trading desk in Morgan Stanley. When I got my first cell phone, it was bigger than this and heavier than this. It probably felt more like this than anything else. It wasn't 5 kilos, but it wasn't super light. But now we're talking, and when everybody started getting cell phones, the sort of tenor of the way these things got used and the impact that they had on society was massive, and you could feel it over time. Now you can still feel it over time. Go out to a restaurant and watch two people actually having dinner together. A lot of what they're doing is on their phone. They're chatting about what's on their phone. And sometimes they're chatting to each other on their phone. Get used to it. But the thing is, there are all these unintended consequences of these new technologies that come out, particularly when they become mass adoption. And because this is now a new market sensor layer, it also is a new camera layer, a new audio layer. It's a completely different surface on which technology is going to be used. And a new biometric layer as well, right? Because the temptation is obvious. If the glasses can see what you see, well, the next product pitch is to identify what you see. Now you're not just recording. Now you're gathering data as well. And now you're identifying this. I said this earlier, I'd love to have this. I run into people all the time, and most people are a little clueless when they see someone that they haven't seen in like 2 or 3 years without like reintroducing themselves to like, and if they remember your name, they presume you remember theirs. So like, Michael, it's great to see you. But I do this all the time. If I run into somebody that I haven't seen in a while, I'm like, Bob, it's great to see you. My name is Michael Waits. And they're like, sure, I remember, but there's no downside. But that's what these glasses are going to start doing too. They're going to start introducing things to you in real time that maybe you already know or have forgotten as well, right? And this is where the surrounding discourse is moving, okay? This idea that merely existing in public is going to feel different. It's just going to feel different, okay? And I want to be clear about this. This is not about like this company is bad or people are overreacting or that company is bad. The deeper question is really structural, and I think it gets back to kind of a societal question, actually. Can a society absorb face-worn AI without redesigning privacy norms, laws, and defaults? Right? Because our privacy today is based on friction. and smart glasses remove friction. So what are the things, like what would a privacy reset look like? I think you need stronger consent signaling. I really do. Maybe that's a word that people don't understand per se, but it's like, I want to know you're doing it. I really do. I want to be blatantly obvious, and I want to have some say over like whether you can actually record. Recording lights are great, particularly if but they're not enough, particularly if they're subtle or ignorable. And I can imagine a situation actually where somebody is using those glasses to record and they've kind of forgotten. Because again, it's ambient for them as well. It just exists. And maybe they forget. I can see this happening a lot. Like, oh, darn, I'm sorry. I did not mean to be recording, but I was. And I think, and Apple will probably take this stance as well, or at least they'll say they will, is data minimization by default. In other words, you only get to gather what I say you can gather. You can only share what I say you can share, regardless of what whoever the provider of those glasses policy is. That like, well, at some point we can have some humans in the loop. We just don't know when and where. I do want consent on that as well. But I think the default should be, yeah, we're not really sharing that much with you. And I think there have to be laws for public capture. Again, you don't want somebody walking up to your table with just their phone going, even if it's someone you know really well, and just recording you. You would knock the phone. You would be like, dude, what are you doing? Are you recording me? You don't want that. But if their hand's not up, if it's just their glasses and they walk over, you may ignore it because you may think, I haven't seen Bob in 15 years. It's so great that he's now coming over to my table to say hi. Are you recording though? It's probably not something you're going to say at the beginning, but boy, you'll get pretty mad if that red light is on. Okay. And I think for that reason, they're not just a product. This is a real governance and a social norm problem. So you have to understand this. We mentioned the number at the beginning, right? 7 million users, 7 million devices sold is a really big deal. Again, early stages here. But I think the real big deal here is we just mass produced a new way to turn daily life into machine readable data before we actually agreed on the rules. And that's the privacy crisis nobody wanted. Okay, three big things today for AGTP Daily. That's it for us for today. Thank you again for joining us. Give us a thumbs up on the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, and follow us on all of our socials, on X, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. Let us know in the comments if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on our upcoming shows, or give us your reaction to the things that we've already spoken about, not just today, but in the past as well. My name is Michael Waits. Bye for now.